Everybody. This is a discussion on flat calling lines. Usually, flat calling is a very taboo strategy. You're not supposed to flat call. You're supposed to push, fold, or whatever. This is mostly in the face of a raise, so it's less limping involved and more calling other people's raises. But most of this is going to refer to high blind scenarios, because obviously in the beginning, if someone raises to 90, you can flat call with some hands, but that's nice and boring. We want to look at end game situations where flat calling may be a better play than something else. Oh, sorry. Cool. Okay, so before we get started and look at some hands, I want to ask you guys, what are some reasons of why we flat? And or what things should we be thinking about overall when we're flatting? Just some general stuff. Good. A trap. Well, Mark, we're just talking about some general things for now. Because then in the hands we can look at who's raising and stuff like that. Good. Because we keep our opponent on a weaker range. Chris says we are deep enough. We have some nice flopping hands. So maybe we could say stack depth. Stack depth and like deeper stacks. Position. Chris said. So we'll put that in there. We have weaker player as opponent, and we know that he probably won't fold to a re-raise, so re-raise won't complete anything. Yeah, so maybe 3-bet won't make him make folds. So let's say maybe flatting can. Good one by Puyon here. Pot odds. And we'll also write especially multi-way pots. Dottie says, don't want to lose our stack against deeper stacks after us. Yeah, so maybe stack preservation because of awkward, how do you spell that? Awkward stack setup. So maybe deeper stacks behind, as Dottie said. Puyon says top pair weak kicker. True, like on the flop, yeah. Because there's a lot of situations, we're going to get to that later too, where we look at some post-flop things. So let's make a little mark here for post-flop. Top pair weak kickers, i.e. strong yet marginal hands. Okay. We don't want to commit suicide. Warren says, like, we shove and he turns over AA. Right. So to avoid, like, monsters. Induce someone behind a jam. Yeah, so maybe induce a squeeze play to avoid monsters. It's a long list. Pairs of 1 overcard. Yeah. If you don't want a 3-bet call off ace jack, we flat then. Someone else jams. We can raise or call depending on what the original raiser does. Right. So now we're getting into all these like crazy detailed things. So for now, maybe we stick to this. Just nice and simple. So we looked at like a trap because we want to keep our opponent on a weaker range. We think of our stack depth. We think of our position, etc., etc. And when it comes down to it, there's probably tons. Yeah. Stop and go. And I think maybe that's what this is right here. A 3-bet won't make folds, but maybe flatting can, aka stop and go. So here's some big reasons, and there's probably tons of them because poker is so infinite. But these are some main ones. So now when we jump into some hands, though, and when we think of these main things like stack depth and position, our opponent's range, etc., etc., now we want to start applying that in an actual hand. Warning, though. Welcome to post-flop, because it's a lot harder, especially the deeper you are, than these like push-fold scenarios pre-flop. So here's our first hand. where hero is Maverick 777, what is the first thing you see? Well, maybe not the first thing. What are a few things you notice after this guy min raises? Like, what are the things that flash in your brain when you see this? Oh, great question. No idea. Just complete unknown. We know he's not from the USA. We know he's not from Italy or France. That's all we know. So Morton first sees a razor under the gun with 18 big blinds. That's really interesting. I see it as a razor under the gun with 20 big blinds because it's like his starting stack. But that's really interesting, though. So good observation. The stack depth of the opening razor. So maybe we can do this. Say, what do you see? We don't need to write that. Whatever. Too much space. Too much writing. Yeah. So Chris sees he has something, and what factors make you believe that, Chris? Because he had like a 20 big blind stack. Probably because he's under the gun. Yeah, there's a short guy behind him. He doesn't seem to care. That's kind of a clue. And he's Russian. Okay, so would that make him aggro? I don't know. But overall, we can tell that he's probably on a decently tight range here. Yeah, exactly. Like, we don't think he's stealing, right? So we see 20 big ones under the gun. So stack depth, his position, and his raise size, too, they all indicate a somewhat of a strong range. Pretty straightforward, right? So then when it gets to us, what's the best play with this hand, considering what we know already? And then we have to think of our stack depth and our position, too. You know, we have 30, what, a little over 33, somewhere in there, big blinds. You're on the button. So what overall, like, if you raise here, think about what's going to happen. If we 3-bet because you're supposed to 3-bet, then what? Like, oh, we're just following the rules. You have to 3-bet. And then since he's on a tight range, what are you hoping for? Right. This is huge. Then he folds all things we beat. Yeah, unless maybe he has 10s, 9s, maybe. Yeah. So the most common flatting reason is flatting an early position raiser when you perceive him as having a strong hand and when you have a strong hand yourself. And then we can also look at our stack depth and their stack depth and all those things we mentioned before. But the number one thing is what Morton said here. He might fold all the things that we beat because we don't want a 3-bet here to say 2,400 and then he has pocket 8s and then craps his pants because he doesn't know what to do. But then all the hands that are better than us have really simple decisions. He shoves, we call, and we lose. Or you could just jam here like a lot of players would probably do. And I guess that you're more likely to get called from a worse hand if you jam than to scary 3-bet. But at the same time, you might convince him to fold because he has 18 big blinds left. So those are some of like the good and bad about this hand. Like, you know, it's good to flat to keep them all in, or sorry, to keep him in the hand with his entire range. But then a bad thing, what would a bad thing about flatting be here? Like an overcard comes. Yeah, Chris is right. A 3-bet is probably the worst play, unless this guy's a maniac, but we don't have any reads of that. What would be a bad reason to flat here? Yeah, just thinking flat to hit. Well, okay, well, what's the one drawback to flatting? We'll see. So what do you mean never set mine here? What does that mean? Well, see, that's what I'm wondering. Like, are you saying you don't flat jacks here because you're not going to set mine? Oh, okay, cool. Oh, gotcha. You're saying with some other hands. Gotcha. Perfect. Yeah, so I mean, if you flat with fours, if you're only set mining, which you might with these stack depths actually you can do. Because I guess in theory, if you're 8.5 to 1 to hit a set, then you would need 8.5 times 800 in order to show a profit, which would be 6,800 chips implied odds. So in theory, it's okay, but whatever. I would fold too. But what? So how about some bad reasons to flat jacks here? Bad reason is that it might induce a squeeze, but wouldn't you want a squeeze though? Because if someone has a better hand than jacks behind you, then you lose anyway. So a squeeze is just going to get him to have other hands too. Morton says, seems like it's just a genius play. Yeah, Steven, I agree. That would be my favorite result too. Yes, Chris says, sure, we don't want to see like overcards basically on the flop. That's the drawback to flatting. Yes, and Puyan says it might induce flatters behind. That's why, like, if you were to flat an early position, it gets progressively worse because there's more and more potential flatters behind you. But on the other hand, you could say that's more and more potential for a squeeze play behind you. Yeah, so a great reason. Mark's onto it now. He's got it. It induces a squeeze, maybe. So Dottie says, but we have position. I don't care about overcards. And I'm glad you say that because that's a perfect transition to the next part. Let's look at the truth about pairs. This is the percentage of the time at least one overcard will flop. Queens, I don't know what it is, so if someone wants to Google it, that would be great. 41.5, thank you. He's just a genius. Google, whatever. So 70% of the time an overcard comes out. 54% of the time with jacks, 41.5 queens, 21 kings. Okay? Are those right? It's 57? Oh, even worse. Cool, thank you. Are those right? Big nukes? Did I get those right? Aces, 0%. That's true. So basically, think about it with jacks here. That means when you flat call here, 57% of the time, a queen, king, or ace will come out. Now, in all actuality, if he does have one of those cards, I assume it's a little less than 57% because this does assume that all cards are live, which would assume that he doesn't have any of those. However, let's just say that half the time an overcard is going to fall. And now how do you personally react to that post-flop? Everyone's different. That's why I said warning, welcome to post-flop. Because when you flat call here, even though this is way better than shoving or 3-betting because we're flatting an early position raiser and keeping the hands we beat in his range, you are putting yourself in a vulnerable position on purpose because slightly over half the time an overcard will come. Mark says, what about when an over hits and then a jack hits? What's the percentage on that? Well, you're 12.5% to hit a set. So then that occurring at the same time as it would be like 57 over 100 times 1 over 8.5 or something like that. Yeah, it'd be really, really small. Oh, and that's 8.5. Sorry, that's hitting a jack all throughout the hand. So I guess it would be 60% of that. Whoops, wrong. Is that right? No, I did it. I don't know how to figure this out. It's not going to happen often. Someone figure that out. Dottie says, Chris says, we flat. He raises on the flop with the ace, king, queen, question mark. And we are flatting. We need to be ready to fold those jacks. That's true. So if you're a person who has trouble, or any player folding like a big pair, then flatting goes down in value. Dottie says most players won't 2 or 3 barrel with nothing, so it's usually going to be easy post flop. That's true. But there's a lot to be said about how do you maximize value when overcards fall, which is going to be half the time, you know? So that's really, really important when the flop comes queen 3-3. Yeah. So, I mean, a normal line, a normal flat calling line, that's the title. A normal flat calling line you might see is like you call flop because you maybe think it's continuation bet, you check back turn and you bet river. I mean, there's tons of ways, but we always have to be analyzing everything our opponent's doing. But most importantly, you're probably going to want to be checking and playing cautiously, but at the same time trying to extract value. It's not worth it to flat call if all you're going to do is just check, 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 check down, or like call a bet, check, check, check down, or something like that. Because we still have to actively be trying to seek value with like second pair a lot of the time. Okay, so now we have to ask ourselves, though, what about when there's a caller and this is what happens? Now what? Yeah. Why? Why are you raising now, but not before? We still want to keep their weaker hands in their range, don't we? Cleanup says pot's bigger, more possible overcards can hit. Exactly. It's still about the same percentage that an overcard is going to come, except now it's twice as likely that that's going to hit their hand. Really good. And the pot is bigger, so more reward. Morton says, but at the same time, we don't want to get multi-way posts. Exactly. So I kind of like trick questioned you. Because yes, we want to keep their hands in their range, but not when there's a lot of them. Like, we don't want to flat call aces in an 8-handed pot just because we want to keep worse hands in their range. you know? So yeah. So Mark says, I would squeeze, but it depends on under the gun range due to his dead money and the weak hand from the flat caller. Yeah, I mean, we can comfortably go broke here with jacks, and if under the gun has it, he has it. So any type of a raise here, whatever size, as long as it's not itsy bitsy, is the best play. Oh, and Morton's right. Caught something. I never even thought of that. The big blind now is huge odds to call, and you might induce a 4-handed pot. Chris says raising seems so much stronger. You're right. Like, I personally might just shove here, but even a 3-bet to like 4K would be fine. So in this hand, hero flat calls. And now we get to, well, 4K, I don't know. 4K is fine. Yeah, I don't know. You can do tons of things as long as you're clearly committed and not. If you make it less, you might induce multiple flat calls, and it can get awkward. But there's nothing wrong with a 3-bet, obviously. So I think you can do either one. Dottie says he doesn't want his hand to look stronger here, so he'd probably shove. Puyon says raise to commit. Mark says raise without committing. I think you have to be committed to this hand somehow, because it's too big right here. Now we get to it's interesting. Good point, Chris. Yeah, so maybe it is better to shove here because you don't want to freak some guy out who has 9s because you 3-bet small. So Steven said earlier you want to induce a squeeze. How about now? Everybody folds back to hero. So we did induce a squeeze. So if small blind is random, you fold. So that means that the small blind is, that's how you justify it. If the small blind's a random, you fold. If the small blind's a reg, you shove. Oh, well, I don't know. Okay, no! Exclamation no! LOL. I know. Steven says, yeah, if he jammed, I would snap anyone there. His bet looks so strong, but I don't know, unless he's really tight, I can't see myself folding. Mark says, I mean, if he's a random, I easily fold. If he's a reg, then I'll have to think a lot now. Ah. I was confused. The small blind was random, I fold. Oh! Gotcha. I'm backwards. My brain was flipped inside out. Sorry, Mark. Morton says, I'm folding because he's raising instead of shoving. Puyon says, small blind still squeezes 9-9. Great point, Puyon. When's the last time you saw someone do this type of bet in this type of situation with nines? Like, wouldn't you expect someone to just shove nines? More often, at least. Zero reads, Marcus. Zero reads. Yeah. Come on. It's a 3-bet to 2,800 here. Yes. And that's a really great point that Mark is making here. Not only is he not shoving, but look at the conditions under which he's not shoving. There's 3 people out there. Oh my God. That's okay. Call me, everybody. When I see this play, I snap fold jacks right here. Snap fold. You don't beat anything. He's polarizing his, well, no, that's not the right word, because polarizing means 2 things. He's singularizing. I don't know. He's turning his hand face up. The buy-in, I think, is an 8. But I think even in a 2, this is extremely polarized. Like, you just... This is always a huge hand. Absolutely always. Yeah, I agree. I think it's King's Plus. Because he's telling all 3 of these people, he's like, I don't care that you're all there. Call me. Puyan says, the way it's been played, you've invested so little in the pot, you can fold easier. That's true. Morton says, if he doesn't have the nuts, then he's a genius. Yeah, that's true, but most people aren't geniuses. But it's a really great raise size. Like, to freak people out. And Big Nick says they usually have aces, but I still get it in anyway. I don't know. To flat here, you have to have 28. I guess if you add 3,500 to the pot would be 9,500, and then you'd have to call 55 into 95. 36%. And if he has Kings Plus, you're 20%. So basically, he would have to have Ace King in his range here. Wait. The heck? Oh. Up's bad call. Oh, it's the small blind. Well, there it is. Moral of the story. Oops, bad call. Yeah, because everybody's just shoving ace-king. Your equity here is 20% versus the guy's range, and you need to be 36, so it's a horrible call. And Big Nick's is right. I mean, most of the time, we always think, oh, man, he probably has it. I can't fold jacks, and we get it in. Guys, start being different. Just fold. Just fold. Okay. Anyway. So Mavs gets it in, and he has queens. which was highly expected. Okay. So now we go to the second hand here. Okay, so this is a hand from Morton. It's like midway through a 45 man. Yeah, this queens is like one of the worst hands you're ever going to see there. It's like maybe queens. If you're surprised he has queens, then it's like jacks is a snap fold. Okay, so here, both, I think they're close to chip leaders here. So in this spot, Morton decided to flat call here. Now, we have 0 reads on this guy. It's a 45 man, by the way, if that helps. We have 0 reads on this guy. We do know things for a fact. We know that he has an 18 big blind stack to start the hand. We know that we have a 21 big blind stack to start the hand. We know that we have position on him. We know that the big blind is short. Now, in this spot, what's different besides stack depth? What's different about this hand versus the last hand? And besides our hand, besides obvious things like that, what's different? Big blind is short, but that's not a big deal. He's not under the gun, that's true, which actually is, I guess, would be better because he has more hands. Steven says you have ace queen and don't have a pair on the flop. Yes, that's it. He 3x'd. Puyan, this is a 45, and there's probably like 20-ish people left. So what's interesting here is that he 3x'd. So here, whoops, sorry, wrong hand. He min raises, and if you call, let's just say if we had the option just to flat call, there's going to be about 2,500 in the pot. He's going to have 7,000. It's like a 3-to-1 pot ratio. If we go to this hand and we flat, now there's a 2-to-1 pot ratio. 3,000 versus 6,000. So what's interesting about that is it just changes the dynamic of the hand, basically. That's fine. If you want to fold, that's totally fine, Chris. I think you can do either play. But I chose this hand because I think it's better to flat min raises instead of 3x's. So basically, the moral, though, besides that, about min raises versus 3x's, is being more aggro on flops with big draws. And a lot of that comes from 2-to-1 pot ratios like this, because they usually set up your draws really good. So the thing is, though, when you're in hands like this, you have to realize that, obviously, like, when we go to a flop, look at this situation. Like, we have a draw right here, and draws are going to occur way more often than if you call with a pair. Because how many draws can a pair flop? Like, not many. Puyon says, can we flat, assuming that the big blind is going to get it in, then assume we could check it down? You could. But I don't think the big blind always gets it in. I mean, this is where that 3-2-1 theory comes from. Since he's got 3 big blinds there, he'll fold a lot of the time. But again, I mean, maybe his type of player just gets it in. Yeah, I mean, you could even ISO here if you want pre. I mean, stats would help if we had them. But basically in hands like this where you have 2-to-1 pot ratios, since they set you up good for draws, we want to consider stack sizes, which is the ratio. Pot sizes, goes with the ratio again. Stage of the game. All those things mixed together are going to equal what to do. And so flatting is fine as long as we're willing to raise here. Because you have 2 overs, a gut shot, 40% of a straight flush. I don't know, you guess you can't hit. Chris says, good point, Puyon, but maybe we can ISO the big blind. Flat, big blind shoves, razor calls, we shove. You could, but then I don't think that you would have the option because he doesn't re-raise enough. But you're right, though. Morton says he thinks this is misplayed. He should shove it now. Damn it. Yes, agree. So weak flop bet from him, impossible, 2 overs, inside straight. Exactly, exactly. Oh, sorry, just repeated what you guys already saw. So Morton is really smart here because he's recognizing a few things. He's recognizing that he's set up with good stack size for a draw. He also recognizes that he has a huge draw. And sometimes draws like 2 overs and a gut shot get overlooked because that's like 40% equity right there. And Marcus, you mean is 3x bet here or is 3x bet pre-flop? Yeah, pre-flop, I think that it creates a different pot size, and generally 3x is going to be stronger than a min raise unless that's just like his absolute default with everything. But I might flat if it was a min raise, but then folded this just because it changes the pot size a lot. But notice, I think what's even more important is that he 3x'd again. His bet now matches his pre-flop raise, and it's less than half pot. Half pot, sorry, bad English. So when you combine those things, it looks relatively weak here, and then combine that with your amazing draw that you have. 2 overs and gut shot being about 40% equity, even if you turned over like pocket jacks. I think is a great spot to jam right here. And so then you could make even scarier raises to induce more folds just in case. So I don't know if maybe on this board I don't know what would fold. Like if he had 7s, he'd probably get it in no matter what. So I guess it doesn't make a difference here. But yeah, making it 4K is definitely better than shoving because it might get more folds sometimes. Marcus says, if you hit an ace, you shove. I'm confused. When would you hit an ace? No way. No way. We're just talking about this board right here. Like, example, if this was like ace 5-4 flop, we should probably just flat call and then keep his worst hands in his range the same way we flat call pre-flop to keep worse hands in his range. Yeah, no problem. Yeah, exactly. Chris, good point. Keep him betting. Exactly. Yeah, exactly. And Morton, and then this is another warning. Welcome to post-flop. You know, calling here is, if it was ace 5-4, is so important. And it's so easy sometimes to just take the easy line and just shove or something like that. So it definitely looks like a missed opportunity, but keep in mind that if we are flatting in these, we have to be more willing to do something cool and continue in the hands and be more aggressive, and we'll get to that in another hand. Yay, great for learning. Okay, so now we will go to the second section, and that's flatting on the button. Okay, so we get a min raise here. This is 4-handed, 45-man, and we don't have stats, but we get a min raise from a guy who has approximately 18-ish big blinds pre-flop. Oh yes, Chris, Morton folded, yeah. Okay. And Hero has just under 20 big blinds, and Hero also has the button, and that's a huge thing in this hand. Okay. So we look at the stack depths behind. We could definitely jam, but sometimes it feels a little deep to jam. So Morton decided to flat call here. I think a lot of people might tend to fold or shove this hand 100% of the time and never call. Like, people usually don't call here. But the thing is if we call here, we're not playing fit or fold. Have you guys heard that expression before? Teddy bear? What the hell? Yeah. What we're doing is we're playing fit and bold. And what I mean by that, and when I say deep SOG, I mean deep stage of the game. When we're playing fit and bold, it means that we're not trying to hit something. We're going to be psycho, and we're going to be bold, and we're going to be willing to make moves. Okay? So when you see a hand like this, he flats. Now what? Okay, let's look at the pot ratio first. It's about 3 to 1. because the small, 8791 guy has 3 times the size of the pot. Yes, bold, we'll say it like this. Bold equals be aggressive. Yeah, bold equals money. Okay. So now here comes the flop. Okay. Now what? I guess we already talked about this on the last hand, and this goes right now. Okay. Okay. So, got different answers here. Morton versus shove. Chris says shove. Morton says or maybe call and take it away in the turn. Mark says call and float the flop. Marcus, oh, I should be clear, Marcus. Fully focused name is Mark. Sorry, I'm confusing you. Marcus says, I know this is not something you will like, but I need to know what reads we have. Go. Good point. In this hand, I don't have any reads, so this is readless. I think reads can definitely make a difference for sure. But good question. Reads are always important. Dottie says min raise. And Dottie, do you mean min raise and then what? Marcus says this is a spot about players. It is. It is. I'm going to expand on that in a second. Chris says floating with stacks is better. Morton says now he's starting to like shove more though. Oh, and Dottie says he wins the pot if he min raises. Steven says, how are you calling there? Feels like if he was raising light, he just hit. If not, he has it anyway. He bet a pretty gross flop. I don't see shoving being fun here at all. Marcus says he floats. So floats and then what? Like attacking every time he checks the turn? Steven wants to fold. Morton says he fold 2 overs like always when we shove. If we float, we give him a chance to hit his overs. Call now and shove turn, Marcus says. Thank you, Chris. If we were folding here, how could we call pre-flop? So the whole point in calling pre-flop was to keep worse hands in his range. So now all of a sudden we're going to say he doesn't have any worse hands? Then we should probably fold pre-flop. Worse hands did get there, but then that would assume that he's raising with what, like low number cards? Maybe ace 7, ace 5, ace 4. When I'm in spots like these, I'm attacking the living shit out of this. But it's not, I mean, reads definitely help, like Marcus is saying, but let me show you why I elect to attack this. If we look at simple combinations of hands in a potential player's range here, sorry, in a player's potential range, there are way more combinations of hands that miss this flop than hit this flop. And just because he hits this flop doesn't even mean that he's always going to call. And this is what I mean by, I should say fit or bold. Fit or bold. Because I'm going to be very, very bold in spots like this. So let me read these really quick. Steven says, Chris, I'm not just folding all times when he c-bets, but this is a pretty wet flop that doesn't give you anything. Marcus says, let's assume we have no reads, but in my opinion, if you're flying pre, we must have a plan, in my opinion. I think if he hits that flop, he won't fold. Okay, let's assume he never folds. Sure. He probably isn't stealing light due to small blind. Mark says some more overcards rather than suited connectors and gives up on turn. Dottie says, I mean, when I bet ace queen in the spot and I see bet and get min raise, go, what? That money sucks, honestly. Or that sucks on us. Thank you. Puyan's got it. Boom. That's it. Is it a wet flop according to his potential range? No. It's a wet flop. It's a wet flop if someone is on hands that contain lots and lots of low cards. And someone remind me, how many combinations are there of unpaired hands? Like if this guy had king, queen offsuit, 16. How many combinations are there of something like pocket eights? That's it. 16 versus 6. So let's pretend this guy has 8s, 9s, 10s, jacks, queens, kings, aces. Okay? There's 6 8s. There's 6 9s. There's 6 10s. We have a jack, so there's 3 jacks. There's 6 queens, 6 kings, 3 aces. How many is that, guys? 42 or 39? Which one? 36? 36 pairs. Watch this. King, queen, he has. That's 16 already. If you have an ace in your hand, and so say if he has ace, queen here, there's 12 combos of non-paired hands when you have a blocker. So let's say he has king, queen, ace, king, ace, queen. That's 16 plus 12 plus 12. So already you're at 40. That's just 3 hands. Steven says you have to take every non-paired suited in clubs. That's right. So ace, king of clubs he could have. So now we're at 39 combinations. Ace, queen of clubs. So now we're at 38 combinations. King, queen of clubs. Now we're at 37 combinations. Look, we're at 37 versus 36, and we just gave him 3 overcards minus the nut flush draws. Now add in other hands too. Add in any time he's folding here. What about the times when he has like ace deuce, ace 3? What if he has ace 4 and craps himself? What about when he has random air in his range like queen 9? If he does. Like there's so many more combinations of folds than calls here. And even if you do get called, even if it's as good as 10s, you have 25% equity. Yes, a backup plan, Chris. Very good. Yeah, and his stack depth, Marcus, good point. He's healthy to fold here. And he's just making a half pot c-bet. Everybody knows what a c-bet is. Like, that's like kindergarten poker. You know? This could just be a blind c-bet because he feels like he has to. Like, how many times? You guys are way better than the average player, and how many times have you just c-bet just because you felt like it was required? Like, I've done it a million times. You know? This is fit or bold right here. But what's cool about spots like these is that's what goes with the flatty. Now, are you min-raising and calling? Because I think you'd have to call. If you're going to, like, scary raise and call, I could see that. Because you don't want to min-raise, have him reshove, and then fold. Because you've invested way too much. Marcus has a point. Flatting and shoving the turn is scary. That's true. And if that's a line you want to take, I'm fine with it. Flat, he checks, and you just get in every turn where your hand, where you don't bink an ace or a jack. Steven says, honestly, I know it's counterintuitive, but even though min-raising looks stronger, I wouldn't do it here. The only way that you can do it is if you're planning on calling his shove, or if he flats, you're shoving every single turn. Mark says, I guess flatting would be bad due to scary turns and not a cash game. I mean, you still could flat. You definitely can. I think shoving might be better, or like a huge scary raise, whatever. But flatting definitely has merit as long as you stick to the plan. Steven says, like, because if he's shoving over my min raise, I'm like, oh no, even if I told myself I would call. Well, right, but if you just convince yourself it's the same thing, then it doesn't matter if you shove and he calls or if you min raise and he calls. If he still has pocket aces, he has it either way. So it's kind of like you just have to sign the permission slip that says, I understand that these are the same things, but one way I feel like an idiot. And it's the same thing, you know? So Chris says, I agree, but he seems too shallow to fold on the turn. Well, he definitely could fold on the turn, Chris, because what if he's just c-betting here with a hand like, I don't know, king queen, and then the turn's a 2. Most guys don't double barrel because that's like genius stuff, you know? Like double barreling is hard. Dottie says if he's playing back, then he deserves my chips. Everybody deserves your chips, Dottie. Marcus says, but I think there are way more scary turns for him than to us. That's true. That's true. Very true. Steven says, if we're saying a shove will get him to fold flop, then of course he can fold turn. Exactly, yes. Yes, and Chris, you're right. If we flat here, we have to do it with the intention of bluffing turns. And which, the only way we can't bluff is if he fires a strong bet, I guess. But this is the power in flatting pre-flop in deep stages of the game. Play fit or bold, so maybe we can make that stand out. Because this is basically the moral here. Fit or bold. Nice fold. Marcus says, in my opinion, he's going to be scared when we flat pre and then we flat his flop. Our line is too strong. Right. Fit or bold. Nice hand. Okay. So hand 3 is this one. And I'm calling this stop and goes, I hope. Yeah, it's a good point by Steven. I think jamming will be better overall. Good, Morton. Okay, what are you doing here? He raises, we flat call. When you flat here, after this guy makes it 5K, are you stop and going? Okay, then I love it. Absolutely love it. The normal play here is to shove or to fold. And now you get into an interesting stop and go from the small blind. Because it's a plan, Steven. It's not just, we're not playing fit or fold. We're playing fit and bold, or fit or bold. Totally different. Yeah, I don't think I've flatted here very often in my life, but I think this is a great example of invention value right here. Like, this is the perfect hand. Fit and goes. Yeah, there you go. I like that. Fit and goes. I mean, when he's flatting here, this is just pure invention value right here. Like, he's doing something that's outside the box, and he has a plan for it. And this is one of the things we mentioned earlier, like where 3-bets, and Steven was the one who said this, 3-bet won't make folds, so maybe flatting can. And Dottie said, yeah, it's stop and go. So 3-betting versus stop and go, what if they won't fold pre? Because there is maybe some folding equity here, but probably not much. And if there ever is a hand to stop and go with, it would be king queen. I mean, it's great backup plan. If he shoves, you could ISO with it if you want. But then at the same time, we have to consider that since he is 2.5ing with this stack depth, maybe that puts him on a tighter range overall. So that's one thing to think about here. So this might be the worst hand I do this with. Our plan here, Chris, I guess, is just to stop and go most of the time. But the moral from this hand is thinking about post flop and having a plan before you do it. Your plan is to semi-bluff a bunch of flops because you have a great backup plan hand. And there's more folding equity post-flop than there is pre-flop. And so now this hand is a good example of having a plan versus plan deviation. So look what happens here. Now what? Yeah. This is really important because whenever we have plans, and no matter what the hand is, we've looked at these hands and we say, hey, like, I have the intention of doing something, but we have to, like, we talk a lot about don't change your plan. If you have a plan, you stick to it. Like we were just saying on this hand, if you flat call this flop, you better be betting huge on the turn if he checks to you, right? Always stick to that plan. But then, whoa, deviate. If you bet, he's going to fold tons of worse hands. We check to keep the worst hands in his range. The same way in this hand, we were saying we would call a min raise to keep the worst hands in his range. And here you go. Morton said this. Because we keep our opponent on a weaker range is one of the reasons why we flat. So that's the same reason why we should be checking here. Steve says you lead out for a min bet. You could. Yeah, you definitely could. But then you don't get the auto c-bet. A lot of guys will c-bet blind. But min bet definitely has some merit to it for sure. You mean shallow for a raise pre-flop, Chris? Well, right, it would. Oh, I see, and you were too shallow for it. Yeah, I mean, like, say you were playing against me, and let's say I had like 25K, and I didn't know who you were, and I had 3 deuce offsuit or something, and I raised pre, and you flatted, and then you let out 6K right here. I'd probably shove blind, because most of the time when people lead, I just think, why didn't you check to me? So I think donk betting into some particular types of players can get them to play back. I'm one of them. Bag clip's another one of them. But then versus this guy, we don't want to scare him away unless it's a little itsy bitsy min bet, like 2,000. So Morton checks, guy shoves. Well done. Way to deviate. Okay. So our last hand here. This is about defending blinds. And normally defending blinds is supposedly bad. You are 4-1, which technically means that you can call with ATC here, because 3 deuce, 32. Pot odds are theoretically incorrect. We know that. When flatting and defending blinds, though, you want to consider stack depth. Deeper the effective stack, the more you can defend, obviously. And when you flat, you want to do like what we did on the first hand with the pocket jacks. You want to consider the opponent's opening position, the stack depth, the betting sizes, and the betting lines. And I guess you could even say like stage of game 2. So when we mix all those together, let's see what we see. A guy opening with 13x, who is technically UTG, I guess, or hijack. I guess it depends how he views that. Stage of the game is bubble final table over 45. Heroes chip leader with 24, 23 big blinds. So when we look at all those factors, and when we look down at our hand, like this seems like a great spot to, well, you could reshove or you could flat call here. The only, I think what's negative about 8s is, I mean, we looked earlier at 10s and we saw that 10s flops in over 70% of the time. And then we also understand that, I mean, draws are more likely to occur from flatting non-pair hands. And this is a great stack depth to where you can, and a great stage of game where you can be raising with a lot of draws. And eights isn't exactly going to flop a draw all too often. So in a spot like this, you could even consider flat calling with some like Jack 9 suited type hands that might flop better. Because you have 23 big blinds, you can afford it. You have good stack sizes for draws and stuff. I mean, look, before we even see what the flop is, look, it's another 2-to-1 pot ratio. Just like, where's that ace-queen hand? We were saying here, this is a great stack pot ratio for a draw. 3,000 versus 6,000. It's a SPR. We do the stack to pot ratio is SPR. And certain hands play better with certain stack to pot ratios. Draws play really well with a stack to pot ratio of 2. So when you call here, 3,000 versus a little over 6,000, so it's 2-to-1. I actually hit something, which is boring. Marcus says, if we don't have any read on his hijack min raise, I like flatting this because there's a lot of equity there to gamble against an unknown range. Yeah, and you're right. And I think that is coming from you analyzing your stack depth, not just the effective stack depth. You know, a lot of people, when they're in these situations, can view these in different ways. There's some players, and even good ones, who will see this guy raise, say, oh, he has like 7,000. That's just about 10 big blinds. Therefore, the effective stack size here is a little over 10 big blinds. Therefore, it's push or fold poker. But you're not looking at the effective stack. You are, but you're also adding your stack, which is really critical because you're gauging your health. Your stack could technically be called like your health meter or something, or your heartbeat, so to speak. And with 23 big blinds, and in this stage of the game, you're probably the chip leader or almost chip leader, you are so healthy here. So flatting, because you don't want to risk that equity, you don't want to risk your health. You don't want to get sick if you lose when there's no reason to get sick here. I think it's a great point you made, Marcus. No ball chopping. That's right. Keep your nuts. Okay. You can't hit nuts if you don't have balls. I like that. Okay. Anyway. And Marcus says, this sets us up comfortably for final table, and 45s is so important. It's true, because you're in a great stack situation right here. So gambling away, well, maybe not gambling. Even if it'd be like plus EV gambling, I guess, away all this equity against an unknown's range here, it's going to be detrimental to future hands. It can damage you later on. So I love flatting. Chris says, if we are flatting here, it almost doesn't matter till we have 8-8 or 7-deuce. Well, it kind of matters because you're not necessarily bluffing because you have a lot of showdown value here. Like you can peel flops, you can check down, you can maybe small value bet here and there. 7-deuce, you have to bluff. Steven's right. Because you actually have showdown equity here. There are times, though, I agree, where 7-deuce could be equivalent to pocket eights, but this doesn't seem like one of them. Marcus says maybe not 7-deuce, but maybe it's like the same thing as having 7-6 suited or 9-8 suited. And that's a great point. Those hands have something in common with 7-deuce, but they're not really. They have something in common in terms of they don't have showdown value. Like you can't check it down and expect to win with 9 high a huge portion of the time, or to call a street and check it down like you could with 8s. But these hands are going to flop draws, and considering the 2-to-1 stack ratio, the SPR of 2, then those hands are going to flop more draws, and you have a perfect stack set to play with draws. So these actually have semi-bluffing value, so there's more of a reason to call them. But I think it's a great point you bring up, Chris. I think there are times when 7-deuce can be equivalent to 8s, but then this doesn't seem like one of them. Right, and I know what you mean by it. You're saying basically sometimes we're changing 8s into a bluff. Sometimes, yes. 7 deuce always. But there are definitely times when we call with 8s not intending to turn it into 7 deuce, but then later on in the hand we might make an invention value decision to turn it into 7 deuce. So I guess sometimes it's 7 deuce, sometimes it's not, if that makes sense. So Mark says, well, if we hit a draw, then it's great with 2-1 SPR. Exactly, because he's going to make a standard C bet, and you're set up perfectly to shove because of that SPR too. We are not set mining here, Chris. Yeah, great point. We're not set mining. It's just a coincidence that in this hand we hit a set because Morton runs good and we all run like shit. Morton says, question, can we always check raise draws with a 2-1 SPR? Good question. Not always, because sometimes the bet the person makes is a little different and it doesn't set you up well. Like, example, what if this guy bet 400 here? It totally ruins it. You could still do it, but it just doesn't make the reward as good. But then there's times where maybe in a certain stage of the game, you're, I don't know, final table of a 180 and you're really close to a big payout jump, but someone else has a couple chips left and you want to be careful because in that situation you feel it's best. You know, so I'd say a lot of check raising draws comes with somewhere around 2-1 SPR ratios. That's where most of it occurs. Like all the times you've ever check raised in with draws, it's probably because you had some type of situation like that. Because when you had that SPR usually leads to when you go, huh, these are good stack sizes for a jam here with this draw. You know, that's usually what causes it to happen. But we just don't think about it in game. It kind of happens naturally from experience. But there are definitely times when you probably don't want to check raise with the draw or even just raise all in with that same ratio. But you'll notice those spots. I'd say the majority of the time, yes, because it's set up nice. But then sometimes no, because invention value. You'll find a spot where maybe you find it's more valuable to fold or more valuable to flat based on your surroundings. There's no right answer to anything. I'm an awful coach. Cool. Okay, Marcus says, and I think it's good to choose hands that we won't be dominated by his range when we want to flatten this kind of spot. Yeah, thanks, man. That's a great point. Yeah, ace 5 here sucks. But something like 9-8 offsuit is way better. Thank you, sir. Ace 5 would be garbage here. That's a great point, Marcus, because you're going to flop an ace, and then, oh, shit. Then what? You check, he bets, you go, okay, I call. You check, turn, he bets again, But then at the same time, if he doesn't have an ace, he's going to go, fuck, he's got an ace. Because that's what most people think about, you know, because it's easy. So I 100% agree. Ace 5 sucks. And that's what's so cool you say that, because so many sit and go players are so focused on ranges in terms of percentage ranking. Ace 5 is better than 10-7 offsuit. Why? Because all these programs say that it's in a higher percentage ranking or percentage bracket. But then there's certain times when certain hands go down in value and supposedly weaker hands increase in value. Great that you said that, Marcus. So do we want to flat here with eights? Well, I think what makes it more of a flat is because of what Marcus said earlier about how your equity here is so strong and you don't want to blindly gamble it away, even though it might be plus EV. Yes, it depends on the raiser. Because if you have information on him that says maybe he's opening wide, like, example, if I was min-raising here, the best play, well, maybe the best play is like flat and check raise on every single flop just to get more value. But shoving would definitely go way up in value because you know that I'm going to fold a lot, right? But then versus these guys, we don't necessarily know what their range is. And a lot of that comes from unknown. You could use stats, though. That could help a little bit. But we don't know if he perceives himself as under the gun or hijack, because that could affect someone's thought process. But you can definitely take it slower because you're in such a healthy position, as Marcus pointed out earlier. Steven says, some of them raise call off stuff like Queen Jack. And it never does miss, that's right. Yeah, I mean, that's one thing to keep in mind with a hand like eights. If you do reshove and someone kind of makes a give-up call, it's more likely that their give-up call is going to result in a 50-50. And that sucks to just give someone a free 50-50 when they make a horrible play. But I think a lot of it here is just you have 23 big blinds. And even though the effective stack is like 12 or 13, your health is 23. And in this stage of the game, a mixture of what Morton and Marcus were saying, at this stage of the game, you're in just such great situation here that just because the effective stack size is push-foldish sizing doesn't mean that we should push fold. No, you didn't win any of these. I think you did win this one. So we flop a set. We're definitely going to check. Villain bets a little measly 600. Oh, Morton, another reason why 2-to-1 SPR maybe you don't shove is what if the stack ratio is 2-to-1, except your stack is much, much bigger. So it's like the effective SPR is 2, but then your own SPR is a lot bigger. Marcus says, I think it's 180 in this spot. We have to be more aggressive because it's probably chippy V to flat, or sorry, to shove or flat, check, shove there. But in this 45 is more cautious. Yeah, and that's a great point because that's a stage of game right there. In 180 at this point in the game, you'd have way further to go in the game, so there'd be more of a reason to accumulate chips. But in a 45, you're in such a great position, you don't just want to blow it because money is close, you know. Chris loves the bet. Steven says, I hate it when they bet 600. Yeah, it messes up the SPR. It changes everything. And then you also think about, what is he doing, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, I think the actual term for this is a probe bet. I just learned that from Harrington a long time ago. There's usually two reasons why people. Well, there's three reasons. The first one, hope I remember them now. The first one is they're just trying to find out if you have the card they don't want you to have, which would be an ace. So they're probing. They're asking you, do you have an ace? The second thing they could be doing is they're trying to induce you. There's common lines, I'm sure you guys seen a lot, where someone min bets, you raise, and then they re-min raise you instantly. The third and somewhat likely scenario is that they're a limit poker player and that they don't know what to do besides bet minimum. So that could be the case. Or misclick, I suppose, yeah. Chris says, because those small C bets in most situations, same as betting half. Huh? Oh, yeah. Because sometimes smaller C bets are the same as some bigger ones. I see. Oh, I forgot to include that. Fourth reason, yeah, maybe they're trying to get a cheap card. But you see that more from people out of position, right? Because he could check back and get a free card. So you see, you're right, though. People bet small because they're like trying to purchase the turn card for cheap. So out of position guys donk bet really small a lot. It's actually a great play. It could be some type of a blocker bet. I don't know why. I don't know. It could be. It could be in some sense. I don't know what he's trying to block, though. If we bet 600, you mean in his shoes or just donk bet 600, Marcus? You could. You want to, when you do stuff like that, you in any given situation where you're checking or betting, you want to consider, what is my goal in this hand? Like, why am I doing what I'm doing? And and then based on that, like if you're trying to go for value or if you're trying to get a cheap turn card or whatever, now look at the board So on this board, what does betting 600 accomplish? Nothing. I don't think it on this board. I think it would be silly, but there's times when it could be good because if you bet 600, I mean, maybe you get some value from some weaker hands, but then you also take away all his C bets if he wanted to C bet an ace high flop. If he had an ace, he probably raises you, but it wouldn't matter because you get it in anyway. But there are definitely times when leading out could accomplish something. You would just always want to think critically in the situation, like, why am I doing it now on this board? And I can't remember. I think someone told me. Dottie, was it you, Morton? 22,100 flops. So memorize them all and then figure out what to do. Well, Marcus says, yeah, like what if he's got ace 10 and he thinks, and maybe he shoves because he thinks they're trying to steal. Yeah, but you'd probably get it all in versus ace 10 anyway. And I guess you could get some value from some hands that miss, but the hands that miss on this board that you get value from might be like 7-6s, I guess, stuff like that. So let's see what happened. So Morton makes a huge raise to 3,000 here, which is probably too big because if he has an ace, he's getting it in anyway. And he's probably less likely to have an ace because he's betting so small. But at the same time, now we don't give him the chance to maybe flat call with some bad hands. But overall, this seems like too big of a raise here. So maybe either flat, keep worse hands in his range, or just make it 15 to 1,800. Oh, he shoves. Oh, so, oh my God, I didn't know that. So, wow. Case 8. So it looks like he was min betting doing deuce, but he would have got it all in anyway. So, oh, so if we have two cards, then 19,000. It's cool. Ooh, yeah, I know. Save some time. 2,500 less to memorize. Sheesh. Okay. So summary, fit or bold, I guess, is the summary. Yep, same time. Oh, so last hand we check raised and the guy had two pairs, so we would have got it all in anyway. You're welcome, guys.